program going. My name is Kristen Thorne, and I'm the Long Island correspondent for Channel 7 Eyewitness News. If you've been to this event, you've seen me every year for the past 6 years, so I'm very happy to be here. In addition, another surprise, I have Joe Santoro, my photographer here for Channel 7, so we'll be on tonight. There'll be, you'll see some of your beautiful faces on there. We'll do some of the vendors. I don't know what time yet, but hopefully by later on this morning I may have an answer for you. But it will be between 4 and 6:30 p.m. tonight. So we're happy to do that as well. Thank you again, everyone, for coming. This is the 2018 Annual Breast Cancer Summit. Breast Reconstruction Awareness, or BRA Day, is an initiative designed to promote education, awareness, and access regarding post-mastectomy breast reconstruction. This initiative is a collaborative effort between the American Society of Plastic Surgeons, the Plastic Surgery Foundation, and plastic surgeons specializing in breast surgery. BRA Day occurs annually on the third Wednesday of October. We know that's not today, but we're all here today in the spirit of what BRA Day embodies, and that's education. We are taking it one step further and will not only be talking about breast reconstruction after cancer, but exploring hereditary cancer, balancing work and cancer, optimal nutrition for breast health and cancer care, and sharing stories of survival. Throughout today's program, we encourage you to ask questions, to network, and take advantage of all the wonderful vendors and information in the room. Yes, there's a wealth of information available online, but by being here today, patients, survivors, and family members can obtain both authoritative information and interaction with the experts. All of the presentations you're about to see will be filmed. An edited version of today's program will be available to you on the event website, breastcancersummit.com, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with already. Help us spread the word. You're welcome to take advantage of this. This is just fantastic. I've never seen millennials. It's amazing. This wonderful Instagram cutouts. I am taking a picture of this and sending this to our web department because I have never seen anything like this. And the intern, is she here? The intern who came up with this? Anyway, this is Kate Moeller. Kate Moeller. This is amazing. Did I say her last name wrong? Anyway, okay. So anyway, point being, come take a picture with this Instagram cutout. Essentially, this is wonderful. We're all here, we're learning a lot, but we want everyone else to learn a lot. Not everyone can be here today. We're fortunate enough that we can. So we encourage you throughout the morning, when there's breaks, we're gonna have various breaks, come take a picture, Instagram. I mean, you can put it anywhere. It's obviously an Instagram cutout. You can put it anywhere. So that's just to spread awareness about what everyone is learning here today. When posting to social media, you can use the event hashtag Breast Cancer Summit. At this time, I'd like to invite Dr. Roger Simpson to the podium. Dr. Simpson is the president of Long Island Plastic Surgical Group, the founding organization of this event.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Especially want to thank our vendors as well. Long Island Plastic Surgical Group is proud to sponsor and produce this annual event. As Kristen has just told you, it's our hope that you come away with the resources and information to best guide your treatment and breast cancer experience, whether that is a survivor or a caregiver. The goal of this event is to open the conversation and empower our attendees, you in the audience, with the knowledge needed to make the best choices for your care. Our surgeons work with many breast cancer patients and survivors, and we are acutely aware of the need for greater access to information in this population. We've seen positive changes in legislation regarding breast cancer and breast cancer education. The Women's Health and Cancer Rights Act of 1998 required that all health plans that offer breast cancer coverage to also provide breast reconstruction and prostheses. And just a few years ago, mandatory education about availability and coverage for breast reconstruction and other available post-mastectomy alternatives was signed into federal law by the Breast Cancer Patient Education Act. And we hope that legislation on both the national and state level continues to support breast cancer education and all access to care. And on the topic of legislation this morning, we have the pleasure of having Nassau County Executive Laura Curran with us County Executive Kern was sworn into office on January 1 of this year. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Laura Kern.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join with you this morning, and good morning. So, today we are gearing up for October, Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And it's great to see so many people here because it all happens with you. I want you to know that Nassau County is doing its part. We have our team over here. Say hello, Team Nassau. Our Deputy County Executive for Health and Human Services, Kyle Rose Louder. And Dr. Larry Eisenstein, who runs our health department. And I just have to brag. Under Dr. Eisenstein's leadership, Nassau County's health department was just recognized as the best health department of its size in the entire country, not just in the state, but in the nation. So it's a real feather in our cap, and I could not be more proud. We also have with us Jerry Barish. Many of you, I'm sure, know Jerry and her advocacy, and I can't believe it's 20 years to the month that she started 1 in 9 Hewlett House, giving help, giving solace, networking for cancer survivors, cancer victims, and their families for these 20 years. Seems like it's gone by in a blink of an eye, but she has touched so many lives, and you will hear from her shortly and hear her story. So I think everyone here is pretty much in the know. We know that this year, 2018, all over this country, 250,000 women will be diagnosed with invasive breast cancer. How do we bring that number down? The same answers: regular screening, early detection, timely treatment. And it's our job to get that out there, to let as many people know as possible. Get screened. I know I need to hear that myself. And if you are diagnosed, get the right treatment, get it early. On October 17th, at County Seat in Mineola, we've got that lovely, beautiful dome. We're going to be doing the Glow of Hope ceremony. We're going to light the dome pink. It's going to be a wonderful ceremony. I would love for you all to come. It's going to be at 6 o'clock on October 17th. More importantly, we'll be shining our light, but we need you to continue shining your light and working hard. Thank you very much. Give a shout out to Kristen. Not only is she beautiful, she's a fabulous reporter.
Oh, thank you. Can I get an exclusive on Sunday? Absolutely. Thank you. All right. I know she said, "You look so beautiful today." I said, "I know, because let's be honest, when you're a field reporter, you don't often dress like this, but I had a little bit of a problem this morning when I spoke. Joe will like to hear this. I spoke to my manager, and he said, yeah, after this event, there's some more rain that may be coming in, and there was that massive flooding in Port Jefferson. So he said, we may be sending you there. And I said, that's going to be a problem. And he said, why? I said, because I meant to pack rain gear, but I didn't. And he said, well, we're going to have to figure that out. So maybe doing a Target run, or I have the rain boots, but you have extra stuff. Okay, I'll throw that on. I don't know. Anyway, you'll see me later, maybe standing in who knows what. Okay. Moving on. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Pankaj Singhal. Dr. Singhal is the chairman of Obstetrics and Gynecology Women's Health Initiatives for Catholic Health Services and the chief of Gynecologic Oncology for Good Samaritan Hospital Medical Center.
Good morning, everyone. I think we are still in September. September 29th?
Yes.
29th, right? This is 20? I lost track of time. So September is National Ovarian Cancer Awareness Month, right before October. So that's Breast Awareness National Month. I'm a GYN oncologist, so I specialize in taking care of gynecologic cancer. But over the last 10 years, breast cancer and ovarian cancer and prevention, they go hand in hand. So today I'll take this time to speak about ovarian cancer that is very dear to me, and how does it impact prevention, survival in context of breast cancer. I have some photographs from my patients and also surgical photographs I have permission to display today. There are 2 or 3 pictures which are a little bit graphic, so if I have permission from the room, those are surgical pictures. And organizing committee, thank you for inviting me. This is an honor for me to be here. First and foremost, I have no conflicts to disclose. I don't own any stocks. I don't take any lunch or dinners from pharmaceutical companies. I'm a full-time salaried employee of Catholic Health Services of Long Island. We will talk about only 3 things today. Those 3 things are going to be prevention, detection, and treatment. Everybody can hear me in the background, right? No? Okay.
You can lift that and walk around.
So, when we talk about ovarian cancer, from audience, who do you think in this picture has ovarian cancer? Anyone? Any guess? That's a great answer. It doesn't discriminate who you are. This patient on this laser. Sorry. So this patient over here, her name is Andrea Martinez. She came to me with a weekend flight from London. She had some yeast infection, went to her OB/GYN doctor, and they found she has some mass, some pelvic mass. Thereafter, we diagnosed her with stage 4 ovarian cancer. She was at the time 42, 43. She was negative for BRCA mutation. Underwent about 9 hours of surgery. It was a very, very expensive operation. And then she went on lived for about 5 years. She and I became very close for this journey. And this is her 5 days she was in ICU. There was a big incision you can imagine. She had diaphragmatic dissection, spleen, and I can just keep going on and on. We were there for about 9 hours. This is 3 weeks after surgery, and she's ready to start chemotherapy. And you know, chemotherapy for ovarian cancer is very similar to breast cancer. They do need 6 cycles of chemotherapy treatment, quite extensive, hair loss, nausea, vomiting, fatigue, tiredness, so forth. This is, she had this picture taken after 2nd chemotherapy treatment. This is after 3rd chemotherapy treatment. And mindful, she has stage 4 ovarian cancer. This is, you can imagine she loves partying. So after 4 cycles of chemotherapy treatment, nothing stopped her from going out, friends, family. This is Christmas, her son and her friend. This is after completion of all chemotherapy treatment. There was a huge party. This is post chemo celebration. In Buffalo, I was practicing for about 10 years in Buffalo. This is, we have what is called Saletta Run. So everyone, male, female, they have to wear high heels and run for about 2 miles. And after, this is called Saletta Run. So she invited me in, and that was the first time I wore high heels, and it's not easy to run. So, when you talk about cancer statistics, 1 in every 2 men in the United States and 1 of every 3 women will receive a cancer diagnosis in the country in their lifetime. Currently, cancer is the #2 cause of death in the United States. However, it is projected to surpass heart disease as #1 over the next decade. Cancer is #1 cause of death by disease in children. Currently, we have more than 14 million survivors, cancer survivors in the United States. So survivorship has really become front focus of all the specialists dealing with cancer. We used to believe back in 2000, before 2010, 5-year survival for all cancers were about 68%, but right now, I mean, it was 49%, but now it's 68%, 70%. So cancer is not end of all. It can be cured. It can cause long-term survivorship. However, we have legislation here on cancer spending is roughly about 5% of all medical care spending in the country, and it is the second leading cause of death in the country. So we do need more funding for research and development. This is a slide, we talk about all causes of death, and if you look at number 2 is all malignant neoplasm. Currently heart disease is the number 1, but over this decade we expect this will surpass. I'll switch gears here. We'll talk a little bit about gynecologic cancer. The most common gynecologic cancer is uterine cancer. And the reason we're talking about uterine cancer here today is patients who have taken tamoxifen, they do have increased risk of developing uterine cancer. Patients who have BRCA mutation and they take tamoxifen, they have even exaggerated increased risk of developing uterine cancer. So patients on tamoxifen, if they have slightest bleeding, they should seek care with OB/GYN physician and have a biopsy. Second most common cancer is ovarian cancer, and the others are small numbers, vulvar cancer, and so forth. But when we talk about death from cancer, the most deadly disease is ovarian cancer. So most than half of the patients who die from ovarian cancer. Uterine cancer is highly curable if detected in early time. And the most problem with uterine cancer is they have bleeding that leads to a biopsy and diagnosis. However, ovarian cancer, most of the time it is asymptomatic, means patients do not have any symptom. And we'll talk about that a little bit. When you talk about ovarian cancer statistics, this is the most recent statistics. We have 22,240 new cases diagnosed every year. And as we talk about half of them will die of disease. It's very deathly, and worldwide there's about more than 200,000, leading to about half of those patients will not make. I like this slide, and the reason, we talk about so much funding has gone into breast cancer, gynecologic cancer, research development, early detection, prevention. This is before a lot of us, 1971, if you look at the number of cases every single year. It doesn't matter how much money we have spent. Every single year. Starting 1993, 21,000, 22,000, 20,000, 25,000, and the number of deaths has been exactly almost 50%. We have spent millions and millions and billions of dollars for early detection. Nothing has shown for ovarian cancer to be effective. At present, we have no screening strategies. We have no mammograms, we have no MRI scans, we have no ultrasound, no blood test that can detect early stage ovarian cancer. When we talk about distribution, majority of the patients with ovarian cancers are diagnosed stage 3 and stage 4. So about 2/3, about 75% are diagnosed about stage 3 and 4, and that's because there's no symptoms. They feel pretty good. Before I moved to Long Island about 2.5 years ago, the last operation I did for ovarian cancer, husband was eminent professor of ophthalmology, went for skiing in Colorado, came back, and within 2 weeks the abdomen is distended and diagnosed with cancer, but 3 weeks before they were skiing in Colorado. So asymptomatic, that's the reason is early stage cancers you picked up by accident. For example, somebody is having appendix operation or cyst that you pick up by accident, ovarian cancer. This is the slide I was early morning, I got up at 6 o'clock, I was putting together. It is National Ovarian Cancer Awareness Month. 22,000 patients will be diagnosed, 14,000 dead. Risk of lifetime of ovarian cancer is about 1 in 78. So be mindful of this. When we talk about survivorship, again, if you pick up early stages, is highly curable, stage 3 and 4 is not so. So when we talk about switching gears now, prevention, we talk about family history. I was trained at Roswell Park, where Gilder-Radner registry was developed, and that's led to all the family history now. So I do talk about whether you or I myself don't speak to your siblings, parents, whatever the family dynamics are. It's really important to know your family history, to ask about what's going on have been diagnosed and nothing has changed, because that can impact your own health. When we talk about breast and ovarian cancer, we talk about hand in hand. We have two different major syndromes. We talk about Lynch syndrome and BRCA mutation. BRCA mutation has a lot of attention. This slide still holds true. When you look at breast cancer mutation, general population is about 2% by age 50, by age 70 is about 8%, and breast cancer, this goes from 50 to 87%. Ovarian cancer also goes hand in hand, and general population is about 1 in 78, less than 1% or 1.2% code, but it can be as high as up to 44% risk. And keep in mind, for ovarian cancer, we have no screening strategy. We have none whatsoever. So when we talk about family history, and I hope I'm not repeating myself again and again, but if a patient comes to my office and she has no history of personal history of breast and ovarian cancer, and we switch to family history, no history of breast cancer, but they have a ovarian cancer less than 50, based on that, the risk that you may have a BRCA mutation is about 2.8%, and that goes higher and higher. If you look at breast cancer less than 50, but no ovarian cancer versus ovarian cancer and breast cancer, any family member. So if you keep going down, if the patient herself has breast cancer or ovarian cancer, the risk goes really high. So if you remember, we have 5.6%, 17%, and 21%, but Eastern European and Ashkenazi Jewish population, those numbers have doubled because of the founder mutation. So just based on the family history alone, you could predict the likelihood of carrying a genetic mutation, and that's really important. It takes less than 2 minutes for physicians to go over this history, and it's important for everyone to know their family members. What is happening with them? Hey, anything new has happened. And Thanksgiving is a perfect time. Endometrial cancer risk is also increased in Lynch syndrome, so is colorectal cancer. Same thing is ovarian cancer is also increased in Lynch syndrome or HPCC and gastric cancer. I'm going to switch gears here. We kept talking about that there is no symptoms. Patients who have ovarian cancer, most of the time they have no symptoms. That's not necessarily true. Majority of the patients, they have had symptoms for up to 1 year before they were diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And those symptoms are so non-specific. There's nothing to do with gynecologic issues at all. They may have bowel habit changes. They may have constipation, diarrhea. They may have acid reflux. They have had colonoscopies. They have had endoscopies. For up to 1 year before they were diagnosed, they have urinary symptoms. They go to the bathroom all the time. They have had urinary treatment infection for about 5-6 times. They had cystoscopies. They may have non-specific pain. They just think they're putting on weight, but it's all the fluid in the abdomen. So they have symptoms, but they're very non-specific. Anytime we have someone has gastrointestinal symptoms, change in bowel habits, feeling full after eating food, acid reflux, urinary issues, they go to the bathroom all the time, and they have multiple urinary infections, treated with no documentation of bacteria, they had cystoscopies, that's a major red flag, major red flag. And those patients had symptoms up to 1 year before they were diagnosed with ovarian cancer. So if you bring up the symptoms to your physician and they do not listen to you, I would suggest find a different physician. In this case, you do need further testing, at least ultrasound, CT scans, blood tests, clinical exam, and have a very close follow-up. Those are very non-specific symptoms. This is typical, you will see, patient is in Colorado 3 weeks skiing, and boom, within 2-3 weeks, the belly is distended. And this is primarily because of fluid in the abdomen that is made by cancer. How does it spread cancer? It's very common. It starts in the ovary or fallopian tube. Then it can spread throughout the abdomen. Most common place is diaphragm. You will find bowel blockages, bowel obstructions, but that's really far down the road. And that's the reason when they have implants or tumor on the stomach, it causes acid reflux. They may have tumor spots on the bladder. That may cause urinary frequency, that they have urge to the bathroom all the time. And it takes up to 1 year before somebody says, you know, something is wrong. Let's look at it. When we talk about treatment, the treatment really is surgery for majority of the time, followed by additional treatment with chemotherapy. Surgery, they're quite extensive operation. If somebody says they can do ovarian cancer surgery in 2.5-3 years, I would say it's powerful, but It really takes 5-6 hours to do the surgery. These are long surgeries, extensive surgeries, includes bowel dissections, include dissection of bladder, maybe ureters, maybe diaphragm. Once you go in there, it's really, you have to remove all cancer that you can see. It's very, very common to do bowel dissections. It's very common to do diaphragmatic dissection, to remove lymph glands if it's involved by tumor. These are very, very extensive operations. This is not uncommon that once you go inside, you will find tumor spots all over. And it really takes about a good 5, 6, 7 hours of work to remove all the tumor. This is tumor implants. This is liver retracted. You can see tumor spots on the diaphragm. This is very common. If you leave this tumor behind, it's almost impossible to cure. It doesn't matter how much chemotherapy you give. So when we talk about evaluation, it's important that surgery be performed by gynecologic oncologists who are trained in women's cancer, not by OB/GYN doctors or general surgeons. They do need additional training. And there's overwhelming data that if surgery is done by gynecologic oncologists who specialize, you have much higher cure rates. Goal from surgery is to remove all cancer that you can see. All cancer that you can see. This is a research that came back in 1994 that if you leave any tumor behind, it decreases your survival rate. Doesn't matter how much chemotherapy it is. Sorry. And this is also, if you leave tumor behind, the goal is to remove all visible tumor. But if you leave any tumor behind, you do have the risk of not being able to cure the disease. In this, the top line shows the tumor, there was no visible tumor, and those patients had the longest survival. They had the longest survival. However, if you leave any tumor behind, the survival goes down dramatically. So surgery plays a very, very big role in this cure. This was again study done that if you're able to remove all the cancer, you have much higher survival rate. I'm switching gears again. What after surgery? Most of the patients, I would say almost everyone after surgery will need some sort of chemotherapy treatment. I put together this slide going back 1978. We have come a long way for ovarian cancer, and we have a very standardized treatment. Most of these drugs are not currently in use except paclitaxel. Most of the patients who need chemotherapy treatment after surgery. This was a study done at Roswell Park national level, and this is the chemotherapy that is administered directly in the abdomen after surgery. Traditional treatment involves giving intravenous chemotherapy treatment, but this data showed this is the first time in history of cancer, doesn't matter any cancer, that giving chemotherapy directly in the abdomen after operation improved 16 months survival. Nothing has ever shown this dramatic improvement. So there are a few places that offer this treatment, giving chemotherapy directly in the abdomen. At Good Samaritan Hospital, we do offer this treatment. It is very tedious, but if you can administer this chemotherapy treatment, this is the best, hands-on best way of administering chemotherapy. So, concluding, it's really important to have family history. Based on that, you could have early detection. It's very, very important to select your surgeon and type of chemotherapy treatment, and nothing like having a support system. I have 2 more slides. This is what I feel about ovarian cancer, but it doesn't mean we can't do it. And this slide is from Andrea Martinez, and she always talks about be strong when you're weak, be brave when you're scared, be humble when you're victorious, be badass every day. This is her statement, and I still carry it with me. And I thank you for having me here. I would invite questions if any in the audience. Yes.
Singal, thank you very much. That was great. You mentioned Lynch syndrome and you mentioned genetic links. You mentioned Lynch syndrome and you mentioned possible genetic links between ovarian cancer and other diseases. Is there a role for prophylactic oophorectomies, prophylactic removal of the ovaries in patients with those diagnoses?
You know, that's a great question. So I will change the term from prophylactic to risk reduction. Prophylactic still it's good, but we like restoration. So the question is, if someone has genetic mutation, BRCA mutation, Lynch mutation, can you decrease the risk of ovarian cancer? So we have a very good idea as to someone with BRCA mutation 1 and 2, when they will develop in time frame ovarian cancer. If you are able to remove ovaries and fallopian tube before they develop cancer, you will decrease the risk of ovarian cancer by about 95%. And the reason I say 95% because the inside lining of abdomen, which covers the inside lining called peritoneum, and the ovaries are derived from a single cell. So the inside lining of abdomen is still at risk of developing cancer, which behaves just like ovarian cancer. So that risk is about 5% over lifetime. So anyone who's diagnosed with BRCA mutation or Lynch mutation, once you have completed childbearing, it's open. Childbearing could be 25, 28, 30, 35. But anytime more than 35, you start to notice risk of ovarian cancer goes up. So we like to recommend removing ovaries and fallopian tube before, not sooner than 35, but after they've completed childbearing. And that is the only way to decrease risk of ovarian cancer. I will go even further. More and more research is coming out. I have several patients who are diagnosed with breast cancer at age 35, 38. It's not normal to develop breast cancer at a young age, but they are negative for BRCA mutation, they are negative for all this testing. That doesn't mean they may not have element of genetic mutation that's not been diagnosed yet. Our technology is still primitive. We are every single day finding out new mutations that may account for development of breast cancer at early age. So be mindful, having a negative genetic mutation testing doesn't mean that you do not keep an eye on news media, do not keep an eye on new technology. Every 6 months, every year, new things keep coming up that you may benefit from.
Thank you for your presentation. It was helpful. So we know that peritoneal cancers and ovarian cancers can sometimes be difficult to differentiate. So I wanted to know, are there any, as far as screening is concerned, are there any tumor markers for peritoneal cancers, or are there any treatments that have been tried for these types of cancers as well? Does it overlap with ovarian cancer?
So that's an excellent question. The question is the inside lining of abdomen called peritoneum and ovarian cancer. Both cancers behave exactly the same. And I can tell you, men, they never ever develop peritoneal cancer. It's only in women. So we believe that both ovarian cancer and peritoneal cancer behave the same. The distinction is under microscope. Once you perform the tumor surgery, under microscope, if tumor is invading into ovary about 4 millimeter, we call it ovarian cancer. If it doesn't, we call it peritoneal cancer. So this distinction is mostly for academic and teaching purposes. For clinical treatment, the goals are exactly the same. So fallopian tube cancer, peritoneal cancer, and ovarian cancer, they behave exactly the same. There's very minor distinction under microscope, but for treatment purposes, for surgery and chemotherapy treatment, is exactly the same. I hope that answers your question. Maybe not. The blood test, the tumor marker, we still use the same, but called CA-125 level. That was developed at Roswell Park, where I was trained. We still use CA-125 level. That is very sensitive. Patients who have cancer, we use that marker blood test every chemotherapy treatment to see how they're responding to treatment. But CA-125 level is not a screening test. We just did surgery last week at Good Samaritan Hospital. Patient had CA-125 level of 2,800. The normal range is 0 to 35. 2,800 is very, very high. And I was fully concerned she has cancer, but it was not cancer. She has endometriosis that was ruptured and spreading throughout the belly. There was no cancer. So it's not a marker that you can test who has cancer, who doesn't have cancer. But once someone has cancer, you can use that blood test to tailor and see how they're responding to treatment. Sure. Thank you very much.
If anyone still has questions for the doctor, you'll notice on your table there are some comment cards. So you can leave a question there, just leave the writing face up. And during the next break, we'll come and collect those, and we'll make sure that your questions get answered. I would now like to turn the stage over to our next speaker, Christine Brennan. Christine is the Program Director of Cancer and Careers, an organization that empowers and educates people with cancer to thrive in the workplace. Christine.
For those of you who aren't familiar with our organization, I just want to tell you briefly about it. We are a 17-year-old national nonprofit that empowers and educates people with cancer to thrive in their work environment. And we do that by offering a comprehensive website in both English and Spanish. We have a host of publications also both in English and Spanish. We offer career coaching. We have webinars throughout the year that are archived, live webinars, and they're archived on our website. And we offer our programs and services to patients, survivors, healthcare professionals, and employers. And all of our services are offered free of charge. So I've set these slides up in a bit of a story arc to give some structure about what I'm going to talk to you about this morning. And I imagine that those of you who are patients are all in different places in terms of your own story and the things you're thinking about. Some of you may have just been diagnosed. Some of you may have already made decisions about whether to work through treatment, and others perhaps are thinking about going back to work after having taken some time off. But regardless of where you are today, I hope that you will find some pieces of what I discussed that are useful now, and perhaps others that you can tuck away for later, because there's a lot of information that applies along the arc for each individual path that each of you is on. And I want to begin by acknowledging the challenges and the tensions that arise when thinking about your work, your life, how everything is going to come together. And specifically when we think about that, the intersection of work and cancer, it's important to recognize that a lot of questions come up. And sometimes the answers to those questions are naturally in conflict with one another. And in the midst of all this asking and answering, there are really two overarching questions that can help to begin to illuminate the best path forward for you. And the first question is, how important is work to you personally, and what really does that mean? And then the second, what information do you need in order to make the best possible decision for yourself about working through treatment? And inevitably, this is going to lead to a lot more questions, because as we know, what we want isn't always what's feasible. And so the key question then becomes, how do you find a path that's workable for you? So some additional points to consider. How will your treatment and your schedule affect your work, and vice versa? Certainly, thank you. Certainly, talking with your healthcare team about talking with your healthcare team about that subject is going to be important. Finding out things such as when, depending on the protocol you're on for treatment, when your side effects are likely to kick in. If, for example, you're on chemotherapy that makes you feel unwell almost immediately, is it possible for you to schedule your treatment on a Friday so that you have the weekend to recover at home? Well, I realize there may not always be flexibility and availability in terms of appointments. I encourage you to be proactive and talk to your healthcare provider about what works for you. It's also important to talk to your medical team about other parts of your work, such as your commute. For example, is it going to be feasible for you to sit in rush hour traffic for 60 minutes twice a day to and from work? Or if you travel to work via public transportation, is your immune system going to be able to manage being on a bus or a subway during cold and flu season. And of course, no person is only their diagnosis and their work. So what are other aspects of your life that you are going to want to have energy for? Perhaps you've taken a new class, or you're the one who cooks all the meals at home, or you're responsible for transporting your kids to and from sports practice. The truth is that each of us has a limited pool of resources and energy that gets divvied up into our own personal pie chart. And so you add cancer to the mix, and that pie gets smaller and smaller as treatment continues, and prioritizing is going to become really important. And clearly, finances and insurance are usually tied to our jobs and are also very important. So often those become the driving factors in determining whether or not you're going to work through treatment. Or maybe they're important, but they're not the #1 reason. Many people want to continue working because first and foremost, it's who they are. It's what they do. I think particularly in this country, when we meet someone for the first time and we say, what do you do? We don't say, what's your favorite food? Or, what's the best book you've read? So it really becomes a very profound question. And for people who all of a sudden are realizing that they may no longer be able to work in the same way they used to, then there becomes, for some, a secondary crisis, which is an identity crisis. So you want to think about how you are going to respond to that emotionally, and you want to talk to your healthcare team about it so that they know where you're coming from, especially if it looks like your capacity to work is going to be impacted. So in an effort to answer all these questions and make some decisions, you're going to need to do a lot of information gathering. And this slide is great because it shows you, the different buckets, so to speak, where that information can be sorted. And so we just talked a lot about the medical and treatment, or not a lot, but we talked a little bit about the medical and treatment information. But I want to make another point, which is you want to be very specific regarding the type of work you do. It's not going to be enough to tell your doctor and medical team, I'm an account executive. You want to share with them what your responsibilities are day to day, what your routine looks like. And the next bucket is work information. So for that, you're going to want to consult your employee handbook or information, papers that you might have signed when you first took your job, to find out what's available to you in terms of health care or health insurance, I should say. But also, are there workplace policies such as flexible schedules or donated leave pools that you might have access to? And then the third category, legal information. I am not an attorney, so while I'm going to talk about the law, I'm going to do so only in very broad terms. But I strongly encourage any of you who has a legal question to consult an attorney, a cancer rights attorney, an employment attorney, about about your specific circumstances. I've also listed some legal resources at the end of this presentation. But the law plays a very important role in thinking about and talking about work and cancer, which is why I include it. But I also want to emphasize that the point of talking about it is not because, I think it's likely that an employment situation will become litigious, but rather it's because legal and practical issues don't exist in separate vacuums. Often when there's a practical concern, there's a legal piece to it as well. And for many, the law becomes a very valuable tool in helping them to create a plan for working through treatment. So for the purposes of today, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Americans with Disabilities Act. I'll give you a bit of background so that you know it's something you should explore further based on your own situation. Like all laws, first I should say the ADA is a federal law, so that means it applies in all 50 states. Like all laws, it has certain requirements that must be met in order for you to use it. And in broad strokes, those requirements are that your employer must have a minimum of 15 employees, you must have the necessary skills, certifications, etc., to do the job you are hired to do, and your disability must meet the criteria determined by the ADA. If you meet all of these requirements, the Americans with Disabilities Act can protect you from discrimination, It can also provide access to reasonable accommodations, which I will touch on a little later. Again, I really just want you all to leave here knowing that the law is one of the many tools you can use to figure out how to balance work and cancer. But I also encourage you to speak with a professional if you have concerns about your specific situation. So now I want to talk just briefly about the online space. We hear from survivors all the time about the role that the internet is playing in helping them through their cancer experience. For many people, it creates a sense of community. Some people blog to kind of make sense about everything that they're going through, which can really help them feel better in the moment. But it also creates a written record of information that can be difficult to get rid of. At the same time, research indicates that more and more employers and hiring managers are Googling employees and prospective candidates. And they're not necessarily doing it to find something negative, rather they're doing it to find out more about the people they work with or about someone they're thinking of hiring. Still, it's possible that they'll come across information that that individual would prefer not to share with an employer. So I want to be clear, I'm not saying never post anything. I just think it's very important for people to have a better understanding of the virtual landscape so that they can make informed decisions about how their story is being presented online. And while I imagine that there are a few of you who are saying to yourself, but I'm always really careful, I check my privacy settings and so forth, doesn't that mean that it's secure? But the fact is that the answer is a little more complicated than that, because websites and social media platforms gather users' information all the time for various reasons, and they change their privacy policies pretty frequently. So it's important to be aware of that. Unfortunately, I don't have time to take a deep dive into online privacy, but what I will say is we have a webinar that we just did that's archived on our website on disclosure and privacy, and we also have a document on our website about maintaining privacy, which you may find useful. So if privacy policies provide imperfect protection, what are other steps you can take? And we recommend developing a personal disclosure plan. To start, you want to make clear decisions about what, if any, information you're going to share about your cancer journey, who you're going to share it with, where you're going to share it in terms of specific websites and blogs and so forth. And as you think through what's best for you in terms of disclosure, you want to consider the potential long-term impact of disclosing online. It may be the case that some of you have disclosed at work and everyone there is really supportive, and that's an amazing situation to be in. But the fact is that the internet isn't going away. And so what happens if you find yourself looking for a job in a few years, or that amazingly supportive boss you have now moves on and you have a new hiring, or a new manager, I should say, who's starting to Google her staff to find out more about them. There's no way to know how that person is going to respond to information that they read or that they find. And then once you've decided whether to disclose and to whom, be sure to communicate those decisions with the people who are close to you, your family, your friends, your loved ones, those with whom you're connected intimately online. We've heard stories from a number of survivors who were inadvertently outed in terms of their health status by a very well-intended loved one. So it's something you want to be aware of. And even if you have shared your preferences to those close to you, it's also a good idea to kind of check out what other people are posting. So just so you have a sense of what's out there online. And you also may want to consider your relationship to the larger cancer community. Perhaps you volunteer with a cancer organization, and you want to include that information or share that information, but not the fact that you yourself are a survivor. And that's fine. It's just a matter of being careful about the language that you choose. So then we want to think about, what can you do to take control of what shows up about you in a Google search? And the fact is there's a lot that you can do. But really the main thing is to be thoughtful and strategic about what you post. If you think about it, people don't know what you don't share with them. And in a work context, social media is a forum where you can not only tell people, but actually show them what you do as a professional, who you are. So social media sites such as LinkedIn and Instagram and the others you see listed here rank very high in Google searches. So becoming active on these sites and presenting a voice that represents who you are as a professional is going to be an excellent way to help elevate your brand. That said, you want to keep in mind, of course, that different platforms have different audiences. So you might, talk about a great recipe you tried on, your Facebook page, but that's not going to be really appropriate for LinkedIn. LinkedIn is where you want to maybe, comment on the latest trend in your industry, or you want to post that you have a new certification. So it's just kind of keeping in mind who the audience is on the different social media platform you are posting on. And when building an online brand, as I said, you want to think strategically, and one of the things we recommend is to run your posts through a filter of sorts. By asking yourself questions such as, would I want my boss to know this? Would I want this on my hometown newspaper? Or would I want my mother to see this? You also want to keep in mind that while you can delete posts that are no longer relevant for you personally, they may likely still exist somewhere out there. They're just going to be a little bit harder to find. So when it comes to disclosing at work, like all decisions around sharing news, that really is an incredibly personal decision and one that requires a lot of thought. But just so that we are all on the same page, you are not required to provide information about your health or your health history to your employer, a current employer or prospective employer, at any point in time, nor are they allowed to ask about it. That said, there can be situations where you might have to share information in order to access your rights under the law. But this doesn't mean you need to share every last detail about your diagnosis or your prognosis. It just means that you have to provide some support for indicating why you're eligible for whatever it is you're asking for. For example, it would be very difficult for someone to credibly file a complaint against their employer for discrimination under the ADA if their employer had no idea they had a condition that they might discriminate against. So all this to say, it's important to consider all the angles. When someone asks me, should I disclose, I like to tell them, you can always say more later, but you can never say less. If there's a need for you to divulge more information down the road, you can be prepared to do that. But you don't need to share everything right away. So as you determine whether to share information about your cancer status at work, there are two major things to consider overall. First of all, how will treatment interfere with your ability to do your job, to perform the essential functions of your job? And what legal benefits are there to sharing this information? So it's important to note that people want to share for various reasons. It comes down to personal communication style. Some of us are sharers, period, and couldn't imagine going through a life-changing event such as cancer diagnosis and not telling people about it. Others are much more private and, in fact, very uncomfortable sharing personal information. So really, it's about knowing yourself and realizing that however you feel about sharing or not sharing is valid and should be taken into consideration. The culture of your workplace might also play a role in determining whether or not to share information. Do you work at a small company where it's really like a second family and everyone comes in on Monday and talks about their weekends and their kids and their vacations and so forth? Or are you at a larger, more corporate environment where it's a little competitive and it's very siloed and people are very kind of hunkered down, focused on getting the job done? The bottom line is that you want to think about the various ways people communicate at work, with each other, and how much you want to share, if you want to share at all. It's also worth considering whether anyone in your workplace has gone through something similar. And it doesn't need to be cancer. Perhaps someone is out on maternity leave, or someone is taking time off to care for an aging parent. What has the employer provided for them, if anything, in terms of solutions or trying to meet their needs? And how has the rest of the team reacted? Have people stepped up and pitched in and really wanted to help that employee? Or has there kind of been some grumbling kind of behind the scenes about having to take on added responsibilities? So it can be helpful to consider these situations as you make a determination about whether or not to share. It also can be really smart to consider past performances. You know, let's say you have been at a company for 5 years and you've always gotten a stellar evaluation. But now you are starting to learn that you're feeling run down, you're feeling fatigued, and that's likely to continue for a while. You may want to consider sharing information with your employer, just so there's no gaps in understanding if you are no longer meeting the same marks. You know, if suddenly you're not able to do a job at the same level, and there's no context around it, your employer may just chalk that up to a decline in performance. And if that gets into your evaluation, your personal file, you know, that can have a lasting impact. We also get asked a lot at Cancer and Careers, you know, who should I tell if I'm going to share my information at work? And we recommend starting with whomever you're the most comfortable with. You know, whoever you are comfortable speaking with on a regular basis. And for many people, that's their supervisor, because they tend to have an ongoing dialogue with them. And a supervisor can also be an advocate for the employee with higher-ups. For other people, their supervisor is not an option, which I completely understand, in which case they may want to go speak with someone in human resources if the company has a human resources department. But perhaps the most important thing to convey if you're going to have this conversation is that your situation is going to be fluid and it's going to change over time. And the information that you are providing to your employer now, you know, may not apply 2 weeks from now, or 2 months from now, or 2 years from now. And so that it's going to be an ongoing dialogue, and you really hope that you can continue the conversation. You would also want to give some thought to the reality of your physical self in the workplace. You know, how you personally are going to handle the side effects that you're likely to experience, you know, in terms of your treatment, and how that's going to impact your job. And again, this is where you're going to want to talk to your medical team to understand what side effects you are likely to experience, so that you can feel as comfortable and as productive as possible if you decide to work through treatment. It's also going to be important to think about any potential visible physical side effects that you're likely to experience, especially if you've chosen not to disclose your information. Because if your colleagues start to notice that you are losing weight, or gaining weight, or losing your hair, or feeling really run down and are just not your usual self, they may start to ask some questions. And generally those questions come from a place of you know, concern and kindness. Still, it can create an awkward situation wherein you might end up inadvertently disclosing something that you hadn't intended on sharing. So it's worth it to spend some time thinking about, you know, the possible answers to questions that may come up. Now, a lot of people ask about chemo brain and brain fog, very common side effect. And unfortunately, there's no magic bullet to help combat it. But in thinking about some helpful strategies, our first piece of advice is always to let go of the idea of multitasking. You know, research shows that only 2% of people multitask effectively. And while we may all think we're in that 2%, it's worth kind of spending some time thinking about that. And getting back to basics, you know, writing down a list of priorities, turning off your phone, your email notifications so there are no distractions, you know, and focusing on one thing at a time. Writing everything down is a really good practice. It creates a written record for you to refer to. And we also suggest keeping a single notebook with all of your to-dos in it and taking that with you wherever you go. Also taking time to rehearse things, presentations, you know, progress reports, even phone calls, that can also be very useful. So your disclosure decisions are going to drive some of the strategy around how you communicate at work. However, whether or not you choose to disclose widely, creating a dialogue in the office that supports your goal is going to be key. And one strategy is to identify a point person, someone you trust who's willing to be a centralized source of information about you, your health, your schedule. That's going to prevent you from having to update so many people on a regular basis on how you're feeling and so forth. And that point person can also be your go-to so that you can find out what's going on at work when you are not in the office. You're also going to want to understand what your priorities are, and what your deliverables are, and what your team's expecting of you, and how you're going to deliver it. And while this final point about setting limits can be really challenging, it is critical that you be honest with yourself in terms of what your capacity is. And then you set realistic boundaries and you stick to them. And what often helps in those situations are rehearsing what we call professional no's, which I've included a few examples. So another workplace strategy is to use reasonable accommodations, which, as I mentioned earlier, are one of the benefits of the Americans with Disabilities Act, if you qualify. And basically, they are tools that can be used to help people work through treatment or return to work after treatment to make that process manageable. Having examples can make it easier to envision how accommodations might work. And I've listed some on the next slide, but I just want to note that there's a lot of information about the ADA, what reasonable accommodations are, how to use them, how they're useful for both you and your employer on these resources listed here, as well as the ADA.gov website. So here are some questions to help identify possible work accommodations. And while I don't have time to run through each of them, I do want to highlight one or two. For instance, having access to a flexible schedule can be a very useful accommodation. One that allows you to work the same number of hours each day, but adjust the start and end times of the day so that you are maximizing the time when you feel your best and strongest. Another flexibility would be to be able to take time out during your day for appointments and so forth, and make up the time later in the day or later in the week. Another example is working remotely. Something that could eliminate a draining commute if that's going to be a problem for you. So obviously not all of these are going to apply for every type of job. It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all, but they're meant to get you thinking about reasonable accommodations and what might work for you in your particular situation. So job searching, while when you're returning to work or if you're changing careers, and you're still managing your cancer diagnosis or recovery, that is a whole topic in and to itself. But I did just want to take a moment to discuss the issue of disclosure as it relates to the job search, because it's a real concern for a lot of people whom we speak with. A lot of people ask us whether they should include their diagnosis in a cover letter or a resume when they're job hunting, either as an explanation or a positive, having gone through something positive. And my first response is always, you need to do what feels comfortable and authentic for you. But I would caution you to think about this. The goal of a cover letter and a resume are to get you an interview based on your skills and your potential. So in that sense, your cancer history, your diagnosis, and treatment aren't really part of the conversation. Another important point to consider is that if you share that information in a letter, it's not going to be a dynamic exchange. And by that I mean you're not going to be physically sitting there when that information is absorbed, so you won't be able to answer any questions or offer additional context. The bottom line really is no one shares everything about themselves in a job interview, or for that matter, once they're hired. So I just advise people to be, to communicate appropriately for where they are in the process. If you feel it's critically important for you to let your employer know about your health status before you accept a job offer, we just recommend that you wait perhaps until a little further along in the hiring process, so that everyone involved in the hiring has had a chance to get to know you as a person and as a potential employee. Rather than them just reading that information and then possibly putting your application into the no pile. So here are some job search resources. In particular, we have a resume review service at Cancer and Careers, a job search toolkit. I have some copies of that on the table out there. and then some upcoming webinars that Cancer and Careers has that you may be interested in. Again, they're free, just go to our website and register. And I also just wanted to flag for next year, our annual National Conference on Working Cancer is a full day event in New York City. It's free, and then you can order publications off our website. And then finally, some additional resources, about legal resources and workplace issues. Triage Cancer, listed at the top, is a content partner of ours. They have a lot of terrific information on their website. And then finally, my contact information. I know we're running a little short on time, so I'm happy to take questions now, or feel free to reach out if you have questions. I'll be here for the rest of the day. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm happy to take questions now, if anyone has any questions now in particular. Yes. No, they're just waving.
If you're BRCA positive and you have health insurance and you switch to another health insurance company, is there a problem with that? Pre-existing condition and all that?
Is it as a pre-existing condition? It shouldn't be, given our current health insurance, but it really depends on the health insurance that you have, the new policy that you're going to. I hesitate to give information about health insurance in particular and the law because it's super specific. So currently, pre-existing conditions are not an issue, but we have elections coming up. It's hard to know how things might change. Thank you. Sure. Again, I would also, you can consult some of the resources, as I said, health-related and legal resources on our website. That might be a better way to go. Sorry, I couldn't be more specific. Anyone else? All right, thank you again for your time.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Barry Douglas with the Long Island Plastic Surgical Group. It is with pleasure that I'm here to introduce a patient of mine, Ms. Carol Nordy. Whereas most breast cancers are diagnosed through routine screening mammograms or palpable lump that requires additional workup, Carol's journey began very differently. In October of 2016, Carol was involved in a car accident. As a result of a significant amount of impact, an airbag deployed. And as a result of significant enough trauma to the chest, further workup was required. And a certain shadow was discovered in soft tissue. Could it be a hematoma? Yes, possibly, but it did require additional workup. And in fact, workup required biopsy, which in fact showed a cancer. So actually, Carol's journey began as an airbag that deployed. And perhaps this was serendipity. With what started out as an unfortunate car accident, a cancer was detected almost certainly considerably earlier than had it been left to insidiously get larger and possibly spread had this event not occurred. It is therefore with great pleasure that I would like to introduce Carol Nordy, who will give a very inspirational, emotional, and heartfelt discussion of her journey. And I recommend tissues to be within arm's reach. Carol?
Thank you, Dr. Douglas. That was very nice. And good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank Dr. Douglas and Lisa Mounier for inviting me to speak today. When Lisa called me in late July I was very flattered. However, very shortly, reality and panic set in. I am not a public speaker. I would like to share my story with everyone, but I would do it only because Dr. Douglas did so much for me over the past 18 months. I could never say no. So here I stand, hoping not to disappoint. I'd also like to acknowledge my family and my very close friends who were with me through it all. Always at my side, always at the ready, for any task, big or small. Even my husband, after 47 years, did his first load of laundry. I'm going to move along quickly because I only have 10 minutes to tell you something that took place over the past 2 years. My story began, as Dr. Douglas said, on October 10th of 2016. I was in Pennsylvania with my two best friends on a shopping trip. We were involved in a motor vehicle accident with total airbag deployment. I, being the driver, was hit in the chest and, of course, developed chest pain. I had a CAT scan, which was negative for fracture, but did detect small soft tissue swelling in my right breast, and they recommended follow-up. I was always diligent with my yearly mammographies, but I was beginning to entertain the idea of perhaps, at age 69, with no personal or family history of breast cancer, maybe having one every 2 years. Nevertheless, I saw my physician, and I had my mammography on November 22nd at the same facility that I had used for many years. I wasn't overly concerned because previous exams had always detected irregularities. Things like scattered fibroglandular densities, underlying vague nodularity, and always, they said, no suspicious masses, no evidence of malignancy. So I felt fairly certain that this would be the same. Never in the past, of all the exams I had, did anyone ever suggest a sonogram for confirmation. And so I felt I was okay. But this mammography turned out to be quite different. They immediately did a sonogram of both breasts because they saw something in the left as well. And it all culminated in biopsies of multiple sites on December 1st. 3 days later, on December 4th, I received a phone call from the physician who did the biopsies. In my heart, I'm thinking, it's going to be negative. But the voice on the phone was saying, I'm sorry, it's not, it's positive. I was numb. My mind was racing. This can't be right. This can't be me. I have breast cancer. The words that were so hard to hear, but even harder to say as I lowered that boom on my husband. We sat in silent disbelief. Dr. Virginia Morrow was my very next phone call the next morning. A friend and colleague from some 30 years ago, there was nobody I trusted more. Her very competent staff directed me to get all the copies and reports of mammographies, sonograms, CAT scans, and pathology slides. All had to be in her office before my first visit. I saw Dr. Morrow on December 14th, and again heard the dreaded words, you have breast cancer. She was honest and optimistic. We discussed my options. Lumpectomy with radiation or total mastectomy. I chose the latter. I already knew what I wanted to do. I had played it over and over in my mind. I wanted everything out. I didn't want to deal with what ifs, and I didn't want radiation. So my choice was clear. Total mastectomy. Dr. Mora had me schedule an MRI, and she sent the slides on to California for additional testing. Excuse me. Her plan was for me to see a plastic surgeon and eventually an oncologist. It's now 10 days before Christmas. I could not share this news with anybody until after the holiday. I couldn't bear the thought of my children feeling the pain, and ruining the holiday for everyone, especially my grandchildren. So my husband and I agreed this would wait until December 26th. There was still work to be done, an MRI on December 20th, and a few more doctor's appointments. Surprisingly, the MRI picked up 2 more sites, never detected on mammography or sonogram. My biggest fear was that I would not be able to tell my kids without crying. And so I prayed. I prayed every day, every minute that my mind was idle. I prayed that God would give me the strength to get through what was ahead of me, and of course not to cry when telling my kids. Then I thought of my oldest grandchild, Madison, now 17 and healthy, who at the tender age of 9 was diagnosed with acute lymphocytic leukemia. And her biggest fear at 9 years old was losing her hair, which she did not once but twice. This was my defining moment. I knew I could do this. Now I come to the turning point in the whole story. It is December 22nd, and I have my first appointment with Dr. Douglas. Dr. Douglas, you once told me that my energy and my spirit played a role in my successful recovery. Well, you were right, and you instilled that spirit in me that very first day. You managed to ease my apprehension and allay many of my fears. Your calming demeanor, your sincerity, and your compassion were key. You lifted my spirits that very first day. And even though there were 4 of us in that room that day, my husband, you, I, and Terry, you made me feel like it was just you and I. Your patience and understanding were astounding, and I felt comfortable and confident being in your care. You explained my actions, and you drew great pictures. And I say, just for the record, Dr. Douglas, picture day was never my favorite. Just imagine you're standing in front of the green screen, arms outstretched, everything that's imperfect about you is on display. And those bat wings are just swaying in the breeze. Thanks for always making it a surprise. I made my decision, tram flap reconstruction, a tummy tuck being an added bonus. Everything from here comes up here. And I never imagined that all that belly fat that I was carrying around all these years would actually come in handy, but it did. I'm also totally amazed at the power of prayer. I managed to tell my story to my family and my friends without once crying or losing control of my emotions. On January 17th, I had my pre-op surgery at Winthrop. The usual blood work, EKG, medical surgical history exam. But then they started taking measurements of my wrists, my hands, my arms. Basic numbers, baseline numbers in the event of node involvement and lymphedema. My heart sank. My surgery was Wednesday morning, January 25th, exactly 1 month after Christmas and 1 month before my 70th birthday. I was calm. The staff were great. They were all friendly and kind. And I was lying in the pre-op area, saw Dr. Mora, Dr. Douglas, and anesthesia. And then another physician came in to place sentinel node markers. My heart sank again, and I couldn't wait for them to put me to sleep. Some 7.5 hours later, I awoke in recovery, feeling nauseous but not in any pain. My hospitalization was uneventful. 2 days later, I was discharged home, a couple of drains hanging around that required daily emptying and tallying, but all in all, it was good. I was able to manage my pain, but I tired easily and I slept a lot. Over the course of the next few weeks, I saw Dr. Douglas twice a week. Terry had explained to me in my initial visits that post-operatively, Dr. Douglas would manage my care, I would become his patient and no longer Dr. Mora's. The office staff at Lips were wonderful. The girls were so accommodating. They scheduled all my appointments, and they were always smiling. And at that point, I needed that, because I felt like I had just crawled out from under a rock. I also need to recognize Terry, Dr. Douglas's nurse. She was a big part of my recovery. Always upbeat, always uplifting, supportive and encouraging. Thank you, Terry. You always made me feel so comfortable at every visit, even on picture day. On February 17th, I had my first oncology appointment. No node involvement, very early stage 1. No chemo. All the tumors were hormone receptor positive. They were all fed by estrogen and progesterone. Treatment would be anti-estrogen therapy, which consisted of 1 pill a day for 5 years. I could certainly handle that. So, how did this all come to be? How could I have been so fortunate? How might things have been different if I hadn't had that car accident? Would I have delayed my mammography for another year? Would I have thus changed the outcome of everything? And so, even though I totaled my husband's car that day, we feel that it was a blessing in disguise, an accidental finding. On July 6th, Dr. Douglas discharged me, and I thought about nipple reconstruction. I thought about it, and I researched it, and I thought, why? Who's gonna see this? It took me a good year to realize that I was only gonna do this for me and nobody else. So I was gonna see it. So on March 21st of this year, in a snowstorm, I had nipple reconstruction by Dr. Douglas at Winthrop's outpatient surgery facility. Another decision I'm happy to have made, and so pleased with the results. On May 29th, I was again discharged by Dr. Douglas. A very sad day. I felt like I was losing 2 good friends, Dr. Douglas and Terry. You were there for me throughout. My rock when I doubted, my inspiration when I faltered, and my support through it all. You got me through some very gray and gloomy days. I continue to see Dr. Mora every 6 months, sonogram every 6 months, MRI every 18. I also see Dr. Hindenburg, my oncologist, every 6 months. And blood work is always a prerequisite for each visit, so he can monitor the effects of the anti-estrogen therapy. Bone density is done every 2 years. I've made some changes in my life. That have had a positive effect on me physically and mentally. Healthier food choices, I do cheat. Daily exercise, I'm up to 3 miles a day at the high school track. It takes me an hour to walk 3 miles. And the only person I can pass is a little old lady with a walker. That's okay. It's my hour and I love it. It gives me time to think, to plan, and time to construct this speech, which I think took me about 120 miles. Dr. Moore and Dr. Douglas, it is because of you that I stand here today, whole and complete, and able to share my story with a feel-good ending. I hold you in the highest regard and with the utmost admiration. Dr. Douglas, you gave me back everything I lost. You restored my dignity. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Your talent and artistry are a gift, and that you share that gift with others makes it the greatest gift of all. I never imagined when I started this journey that the outcome would be so amazing. A true testament to your skill and expertise. Thank you hardly seems adequate, but it's all I have. Should our paths never cross again, I will never forget you. You will always have a place in my heart. Thank you.
a fantastic job. Fantastic. We are now going to take a 10-minute break. Please feel free to visit the exhibit area. Tons of great things in there. You can leave the comment cards face up. I also want to bring attention to one of the event sponsors, Deep Blue Med Spa. I know every year they give out the certificates. I went last year. It was amazing. So make sure to check out their table as well. You can pick up a gift certificate there or a certificate. We're going to come back here in 10 minutes. Thank you.